Our next speaker is Dr. Hugh Goodacre. Hugh is a lecturer in the Department of Economics at University College London and director of the Institute of Independent Studies. The IIS promotes the study and application of ideologies of national and social emancipation, particularly those created by oppressed peoples through their own struggles, locating them in a non-Eurocentric conception of scientific socialism. He founded the Korea Friendship Society in the UK in 1982 and served as Joint Secretary for many years. He first visited the DPRK in 1983 and is one of a handful of UK citizens to have engaged in extensive discussions with President Kim Il-sung. Decades of work on Korean affairs have embraced people-to-people exchanges, anti-sanctions campaigning, and research on and study of the Juche idea. His most recent publication, which is on a very different subject, is The Economic Thought of William Petty, exploring the colonialist roots of economics, and it's just been published by Routledge. So Hugh, please go ahead.
Hugh, I'll be talking about the Juche idea. Now, what good are Marxists? That was a question posed to me by Alan Freeman 15 years ago. Don't know if you remember that, Alan, as we rather gloomily reflected upon the fact that the greatest grief and obstruction we had each faced in our respective professional, academic and political life had in all too many cases been inflicted upon us by Marxists. And yet all we wanted to do was to follow in the path charted by Karl Marx. The Korean ideology of Juche, the Juche idea, responds to a somewhat analogous situation at the global level, where it has likewise, ever since its origins, interacted closely with the great debates of socialism. The origins of the Juche idea are inextricably linked to the response by Korea's great leader, Kim Il-sung, to issues arising in the context of revolutionary party building, not least of which concerned a critical assessment of the Third International's interaction with the various currents within Korean communism. The public enunciation of the Juche idea as a distinct approach within the socialist camp was a central element of Kim Il-sung's response to the growing tensions and polemics between the Soviet and Chinese parties from the late 1950s onwards. Kim Il-sung's explicit formulation of the content of the Juche idea was in the first instance a response to the growing demand of progressive circles around the world to better understand how People's Korea had successfully sustained such unity among its people around its indomitable and consistent anti-imperialist stand. They wanted to understand how Korea had managed to sustain its relations with the governments and communist parties of both China and the Soviet Union at a time when most of the world communist movement had got swept into one camp or another, and had avoided the factional splits and schisms which might understandably have led to many asking Alan's question about Marxists. By the 1980s, and indeed before, the Korean people, who had never known any other leadership but that of Kim Il-sung, had to face the question of succession to that leadership. And on that matter, the only thing on their minds was how to sustain continuity. A comprehensive elaboration and systematization of his thinking so that it could be carried forward into the following generations was therefore a major issue for party, people, and state. Before looking at the response to this requirement, which was led by Kim Jong-il, I'd like to recall a comment which Carlos Martinez made to me to the effect that we should assess the ideas and ideologies originated within anti-imperialist movements of the world, not according to some preconceived standpoint or blueprint, but according to their success or otherwise in contributing to the mobilization of their peoples against imperialism. I hope I've got that right, Carlos. In this category of anti-imperialist ideas and ideologies, one could compile an enormous great list. For example, there are those named after the leaders who originated them, Nkrumahism, Guevarism, Chavismo. Today, we see biosocialism of Bolivia, Ujamaa of Tanzania, the Green Book ideology of Gaddafi. Actually, in our country, the most distinguished anti-imperialist, indeed insurrectionary movement that we have seen in our lifetime has been the Irish Republican movement in England and indeed in Ireland, whose ideology rests on the heritage of the life and writings of such leaders of James Connolly and Padraig Pearse. Also, in our country, we've experienced the reverberations of the world's Black Power movements with their associated ideas generated by such individuals as Marcus Garvey, W.E.B. Du Bois, Malcolm X, and movements such as the Black Panthers. The list, one could go on, adding to that list, I'm sure. Now, it has proved difficult for Marxists to appreciate the significance of the Juche idea due to the difficulty they've faced in widening their intellectual points of reference beyond those which were available to Marx in his time, which were the Western intellectual traditions of German dialectics, French socialism, and English political economy. In contrast, the Juche idea takes as its intellectual and ideological point of reference this new universe of anti-imperialist ideas, ideas of independence, among which it's distinguished by its uniquely long-standing and close interaction with the great debates of socialism. Returning to the response of Kim Jong-il to the requirement to systematize the Juche idea, this involved a project of philosophical, social scientific, and theoretical activity, which is surely unique in its scope and sophistication among all progressive ideologies which are not explicitly and exclusively situated within the Marxist tradition. A prominent aspect of this activity was to identify points of continuity and originality with respect to received ideas within the socialist tradition. As for continuity, this is quite simply the shared project to follow in the path charted by Karl Marx. As for originality, the Juche idea had pointed out that it was addressing questions which only arose in the new conditions in the world following the October 1917 revolution, which had raised socialist practice to a new level in which the people of a wide variety of different societies were increasingly able to assert their true nature as the subjects of history, building new societies that were transforming the world in accordance with their own interests. On the philosophical front, the original contribution of the Juche idea was defined as posing a new fundamental question for philosophy. The age-old question addressed by philosophy, the relation of consciousness to matter, had long since been definitively answered by Marx and Engels. The Juche idea, which is predicated upon that achievement, was now posing the new question, the relation of people, or man, to the world, a relation of mastery in which people transform the world in their own interests. Now, if Marxists cannot get their imagination around ideological achievements coming from within such a powerfully anti-imperialist intellectual tradition, then they shouldn't complain. I mean, whose fault is that? In 1990, I had the privilege of discussing the potential interlinkage of these ideologies, most particularly those with which we interact most directly in this country, such as the Irish Republican movement and Black Power movements, with Kim Il-sung himself. Actually, I think the meeting was supposed to be between Kim Il-sung and Keith Bennett, but that the Koreans had to put up with me in the chair on that occasion. Anyway, I was there along with Muhammad Arif, General Secretary of the British Afro-Asian Solidarity Organisation. So what we discussed at this meeting was an Irish Republican rally which had recently taken place in London, where Muhammad Arif had made a speech where he had drawn out precisely some of these ideological links. We also mentioned actually that Kyle Jung had been in London at the time and had delivered a speech there. So at which he had expressed the mutual solidarity between Ireland and Korea, to which Keith Bennett referred at this meeting today. And we really felt we were at the heart of this great global process of the interaction and fusion of anti-imperialist ideas and ideologies of our time. Kim Il-sung listened intently to what we were saying and commented favorably on what Muhammad Arif had said. So there we are. Juche idea has been my life really, since, along with Keith Bennett, I started studying it even from the 1970s. And eventually it actually dictated my big choices in life. I left my job as a librarian, went back to university, struggled my way back up to being a lecturer at University College London in the history of ideas. So if you want to be convinced that the Juche idea is indeed something original, and if which I don't recommend, you make the decisions on the authority of old academics, then you can take it from me. But that's not a very serious option. I just hope what I've said could convince you, encourage you to take the study of the Juche idea seriously as a valuable guide in your practical activities in the struggle against imperialism.